This is a revision presentation on the Marshall-Lerner condition and how it leads us to the J-curve. Now, we use these concepts when we're talking about the effect of changes in the exchange rate and how that then affects the balance of payments on the current account. If you're talking about how other things affect the current account, so for example relative rates of inflation, then actually the specific concept of the Marshall-Lerner condition is not appropriate to be used. It's only when you're talking about the effect of exchange rate changes. The Marshall-Lerner condition itself then, you don't need to worry about how you derive it, but it's useful to be able to state it. And the condition is that a depreciation of the currency will improve the balance of payments on the current account if the sum of the price elasticity of demand for exports and price elasticity demand for imports is greater than 1. And that's going to be the case when the elasticities are high enough, which means that demand is relatively price elastic, i.e. demand for exports and imports is very sensitive to changes in price. The J-curve is just then an application of that principle. The elasticities in the short term are going to be quite low. That's because firms have already negotiated contracts into the kind of near future that they're not going to change on the basis of an exchange rate change. So in which case the Marshall-Lerner condition won't be met because the elasticities won't be high enough to add up to greater than 1. And so what we actually find is that rather than the depreciation improving the balance of payments, it's actually going to make it worse. We can illustrate this as a J-curve. We're interested in how the current account changes over time. So when we're above this zero line, we're talking about a current account surplus, and when we're below the zero line, we're talking about a current account deficit. Now, what happens in the short term? Well, the Marshall-Lerner condition is not met. And the Marshall-Lerner condition is not met because the elasticities are low, and they're low because firms have already negotiated contracts. They're not going to suddenly change their exporting and importing tendency immediately in response to the exchange rate change because they've already negotiated all this stuff in advance. Because the Marshall-Lerner condition is not met, the depreciation actually leads us into a greater current account deficit. That's the opposite result to what you'd normally intuitively expect. This is only happening because the elasticities are very, very low because of the pre-negotiated contracts. But in time, firms are going to adjust their behaviour in response to this new exchange rate. They're going to start responding. The elasticity of demand for imports and exports is going to start to increase. The Marshall-Lerner condition will now be met, and as we'd expect then, the depreciation starts to improve the balance of payments over time. So the J-curve shape is entirely the product of when the Marshall-Lerner condition is or is not met.